Hi everybody, Logan Clark with Clark Custom Guns here. What we're going to be doing is doing a disassembly and reassembly of the 1022. Now we are using our Clark Custom 1022 for this example. As we're going through it, I'm going to be showing you some of the things that we do different from what they do at the factory and give you some information on how you can possibly make that happen for your own 1022. So, let's get started. Pretty simple for the basics. Make sure that when you're taking the stock off that you have the safety in the center position. The reason you want it in the center position is because if it is too far to the left or too far to the right, the safety will actually hit on the stock as you were trying to remove the barreled action from the stock. So, to take the stock out, some of them have an Allen key, some of them have a flathead screwdriver, some of them actually have a Phillips head. This one happens to have an Allen key, so I'm going to use my Allen key wrench to remove the stock screw. Once it releases the tension, you do not have to take the screw all the way out. I typically do not, that way I don't lose it. So I will leave it in place. It's got tension most of the way out of it. I'm going to make sure that I drop the magazine out of the gun, make sure that there's no ammunition in it as well. So magazine out, bolt back, completely empty. Safety's in the middle, stock screw is loose out, and that one screw is actually the only thing that holds the stock on. Once you have that screw out, the stock lifts straight up and away. Set it off to the side. Not going to be using it for a while. Then you are left with the actual gun itself. This is just the barreled action. You can buy these barreled action from us. This is the bare bones rifle as it is without the stock. This is the actual working pieces. To take this apart, make sure that your bolt is down and in the forward position. Doesn't matter where your safety is at this point. You're going to punch 3 pins out from this position. There is one located here under the bolt, there's one towards the back of the receiver, and one located behind the bolt at the top of the receiver. To push those pins out, it's pretty simple. You just take your punch and push them out. Sometimes you can push them out. Sometimes you have to give them a little bit of motivation. You should never ever have to bear down on it and hit these pins very hard. If you're having to hit the pins hard, you're doing something wrong. Your bolt's not forward, something is not in the correct position. I'm just going to lightly tap them out with a hammer. There's one, there's 2. Once these 2 pins at the bottom are out, you can actually release the trigger assembly from the housing. Take the trigger assembly, set it off to the side. The next pin that you will take out is this 3rd one at the back. This is actually the largest diameter one. Once again, lightly tap with a hammer. It should push straight out. And what I like to do as I'm disassembling this is I like to put parts together as they come out of the gun. So I know that the first 2 pins that I took out are what are holding the trigger group in. So when I take the trigger group out, I'm going to make sure that I set these 2 parts up here far enough away with the trigger group so I know where they go. Then I'm going to take my last pin out. This is for the bolt going back forward. This is what puts your pressure on your bolt. So once I have that pin out, I'm going to sit up towards the front. Now I'm going to take the bolt out of the receiver of the gun. Once again, this is probably going to be the trickiest part of the disassembly. What you have to do is you actually have to grab the charging handle, pull the charging handle to the rear. That will actually create a point to where the bolt is released behind the face of the housing. Once you get the bolt behind the face of the housing, you can do one of 2 things. One, you can just bang it on the table and it'll drop out, but that can take some finagling. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of welding wire and just put a little hook on the end of it. Nothing special. I'm going to take it upside down to where gravity helps me. Let gravity help you. And I'm just going to reach up in there and pull it out with my piece of welding wire with the hook on it. And it just drops right out. Once that drops out, your bolt handle falls out with it. Bolt handle just falls out to the side. Take the bolt and the charging handle, put it together with your bolt pin. Make sure you keep like parts together, that way you don't lose anything. And now you've got a clean bare bones housing. All of this is a barrel with a housing on it. This does not have to get broken down any further, so we're going to set that over to the side for now. We're not going to be using it until we go back to the reassembly. Now we've got the actual trigger assembly for the gun. This is probably one of the things that is most sought after from our company because we use an aluminum trigger housing rather than your standard plastic trigger housing. If you buy 1022 nowadays, your housing is going to be made out of plastic. Not too terribly big of a deal if all you're going to be doing is backyard plinking with it, but what it does do is it creates a more, how you say, flimsy housing when you make it out of plastic, so it'll have a little bit of slop, a little bit of movement in it when you do any sort of trigger work on it. With the aluminum housing, you can actually do a trigger job that will stay in place, be the same way every time, no matter what, because it has more dexterity in the material. So if you are interested in the aluminum housings, we sell these for $155. That is the trigger job included, that is the speed bolt release included, and your paddle magazine release. So, disassembly wise, you're in this condition. You pull the trigger to release the hammer forward, make sure your safety is off to do so. Once your hammer is released forward, you can take your hammer spring out of the rear. It just pulls right forward, there's no pins holding it in or anything like that. Set it to the side. Pull your hammer back to the rear. Next, you're going to take small punch, piece of weld wire, Allen wrench, whatever you got, small enough diameter to punch pins out. First pin you're going to take out is the one that actually puts spring pressure on your hammer and holds in your ejector. So you're going to take that pin, push it straight through. You shouldn't, once again, should not have to put a whole lot of pressure on this. You may have to tap it with a hammer, you may not. Once you push that pin out, make sure you keep light pins together so pins go together. Here's your ejector. Ejector goes with your ejector pin. Once you have your ejector pin out, you can push your hammer and hammer spring out. These come straight forward. Now, the new Ruger hammers are all one solid piece. Originally, they were multiple pieces, such as I have here. These multiple piece ones work the exact same way as the new ones do. The only difference is the old ones have these bushings on the side, the removable bushings. So if you have the removable bushings, no big deal. Just make sure that you keep them with the hammer when you go to do your reassembly. For now, I'm going to put these bushings back on and just set it over to the side. And I'm going to use the newer style hammer for the reassembly. Once again, it assembles the exact same way, no difference. Once you have your hammer and hammer spring out, the next thing that you're going to take out is your bolt release pin. Bolt release pin is down here on the bottom. Once again, you push it straight through, and that releases your bolt release. Now, this is our speed bolt release. This is not the factory bolt release. The factory bolt release has a V-notch cut into it for the bolt release to come forward and back. This makes it to where when you go to release your bolt, you actually have to remove the bolt release from the locked position in order for the bolt to go back forward. With our improved speed bolt release, all you have to do is simply grab the bolt, pull it to the rear, let it go, bolt flies forward. So that's one of our custom parts. The next thing that you're going to take out is going to be your magazine retainer and your magazine release. To take this out, all you have to do is on your magazine retainer, simply take your finger, put it on the end of it, push the spring in it, and the release falls out the bottom. Once you have the spring pressure, you take it back off, just release the spring pressure, make sure you don't release it too fast, otherwise it'll go flying across the room, then you gotta go find it. Simply pull it straight forward, and it comes out the front. Make sure that you keep like parts together. The last part that you're going to have to take out of your assembly is going to be your trigger assembly down here in the bottom. Now, there are three pieces that go into your trigger assembly. It is your trigger, your sear spring, and your sear itself. So make sure that you get all three parts when you take this out. Once again, take your punch, push your pin straight through, set your pin off to the side, and you should get three parts that come out. You've got your trigger, your sear spring, and your actual sear for the trigger assembly. So make sure you keep all three of those parts together for the reassembly. It's going to be crucial. And then the last piece that comes out, it falls out the back of the housing here. This is your trigger return spring. It's simply a plunger and a spring. And that is as far as you should ever need to take it down unless you're planning to do some gunsmithing in the gun. I mean, it's pretty basic all the way through. I think I used 2 parts to take it all the way apart. Not much to it. So now for the reassembly. For the disassembly, we went top down. So for the reassembly, I'm going to go bottom up. That way I just keep everything organized, easy peasy. So the last thing that came out is going to be the first thing that goes back in. Your plunger and spring for your trigger return. This is pretty simple. There's a hole in the back of the trigger guard. You just take your spring and plunger assembly, drop it right down in that hole, push it in, make sure that it doesn't go flying out. So lay that down. Now you're going to take your trigger assembly. There is a hole in the back of your trigger assembly for your sear spring. Take your sear spring with the bigger round end down, okay? If you look at your sear spring, there's a tapered end on it. There's one tapered end and one round end. Take the round end, place it down inside of the sear. Once you have the round side down inside the sear, make sure that your sear goes into the little L-shaped lock on the trigger. Once that little L-shaped lock goes on the trigger, the upper portion of the spring, the tapered portion of the spring, should go inside the lever on the back of this trigger, just like that. Now, personally, what I recommend you do at this point, rather than having to try to hold everything in place, is you simply just take a retainer pin of some sort. I made this out of an old Allen wrench, and you can push it through the hole that your trigger pin goes into to just hold everything together. So once you get everything lined up, which can be a trick, sometimes you got to hold your tongue just right. Yeah, like that. And it goes in. That way it holds everything together and you don't have to worry about keeping your fingers in the right place. So you take this whole assembly, drop it down in the top side of your trigger housing, and then you're actually going to look through the hole for which your pin came out of to find the end of your retainer pin. Once you get your retainer pin lined up, push your actual trigger pin through. Make sure that you have your pin lined up on both sides. Sometimes you do have to put a little bit of extra pressure on it. I very gently tapped it with a hammer right there just to make sure that my pin came all the way through. Once again, never ever ever hit it hard with a hammer. If you're having to hit it hard with a hammer, you don't have something lined up correctly. Take your retainer pin, set it over to the side, make sure that your trigger pin's all the way through. The next thing that came out of it was going to be my magazine retainer. So I'm going to put my magazine retainer back in. The part that holds the magazine retainer in is your magazine release. So take your magazine release, place it with the, there's a lever side. The little lever hand goes on the right side of the magazine retainer as you're looking at it forward, as if you're looking at the gun. So arm goes in the bottom, goes in the right side of the magazine retainer, and that actually holds the magazine retainer in place. Next thing is to make sure that your bolt release goes back in. Take your bolt release, place it towards the left side of your magazine retainer, and you actually have to line all three of those up. At this point, you may need a small punch or some sort of device to where you can go through there and line all three of those pieces up. Once you get them all lined up, hold the trigger assembly horizontally, flat, that way everything stays in place. Take your pin that holds those three together, try to push in. If it doesn't push in, don't get deterred or anything like that. Take your little punch going on the other side and simply move everything around in there until you get it to where you want it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of finagling. You're not always going to get it on the first shot every single time. Sometimes you actually have to take the pin back out and look through to make sure you can see what parts misaligned. At this point, my magazine release is not quite lined up where I want it, so I'm going to move my magazine release where I want it, take my pin, try it again, and that time it went through. So once again, if it doesn't go through on the first time, not a big deal. Move the pin back out, look through the hole to see daylight, and move whatever piece that is out of alignment into place. Once you get everything lined up, once again, it should push right in with very little effort. So the next part that is going to be going in is going to be my hammer. I'm going to take my hammer and my hammer spring. Now, your hammer spring has a little dog leg on one side, the other side is straight. The little dog leg goes down. Dog leg down, DD, dog leg down. Okay? Take your hammer and put the dog leg down spring on the right side of the hammer. Once again, this is as the gun is facing forward. So take the dog leg spring down, and there's actually a notch that is cut into the finger of your bolt release to where that spring actually goes into. So I'm going to place that bottom edge, that dog leg down spring, into that retainer slot for the bolt release, line my hammer up, take my hammer pin, and push it through. Okay? That notch that I'm talking about on your bolt release, this is the factory bolt release. Once again, it's just something I had on hand to show you. There's a little notch cut into the finger right here on that bolt release. That's the part that I'm actually putting that downward leg of the return spring into. So make sure that you have that spring leg down in that little V on your bolt release. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to put your ejector in. So, easy thing for the ejector, make sure that you have your ejector pin. It goes through the eye or the hole in the bolt release. Push it about halfway through to where it's still exposed. Make sure that your ejector finger is facing upward. Slide it onto the pin, lay it down in the slot, and then finish pushing your pin all the way through. Okay? Next, you have to actually push that pin back all the way, not all the way through, but about halfway to where it still retains your ejector, but allows the spring for your hammer spring to go back forward. So you're going to take your hammer spring, push it back forward, and the pin that holds your ejector in is actually what holds that spring down and puts tension on it. So you push the spring back all the way down, take your pin, push your pin through, and that holds it in place. Next thing you want to do is take your hammer, release your hammer forward, pull the trigger to release the hammer, pull the hammer forward with your finger, take your hammer spring. This is the actual spring that allows the hammer to travel forward. There's a little notch cut into the back side of it for your retainer. Take the retainer with the notch upward, place the notch upward into the hole that is drilled into the back of the trigger assembly, and it should fall down into the notch right in the middle of the hammer. If it's sticking up a little bit or something like this, that's not correct. Make sure that you have it seated all the way down in the hole and then it slides down towards the bottom of the hammer. Once you have it in the correct position, as I have it here, take your hammer, cock it all the way to the rear, and you've got your assembly back together. This is once again, the aluminum drop-in trigger assembly. If you're interested in one of these, call the shop. We sell them for $155. They come pre-assembled, speed bolt release, trigger job. They're set and ready to go. You got the aluminum trigger, aluminum housing. Pretty awesome stuff here. So once we have our assembly together, I'm going to set it off to the side, and I'm going to reassemble my my barreled action here. To reassemble the barreled action, you're going to take your charging handle. Your charging handle has a little bit of a spear point on the end of it, kind of a little edge there. If you look on the inside of your receiver, there's a receiver on the inside of the receiver for that spear point over here in the corner. So make sure that you go through the ejection port, put that little spearhead down in the receiver there. Once you get it down in the receiver, pull the handle back. Now this can be a little bit difficult for people that don't have seriously strong hands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little punch and I'm going to put it down on the inside. I'm going to put it along the far side of the rod to assist me in pulling that release back. And once again, this is not necessarily the easiest part of the assembly and disassembly, but it can be done with a little bit of effort. There we go. So I've got it compressed here. I'm holding the charging handle back with my thumb. Make sure I've got it compressed all the way, which I do. Take your bolt assembly with the notch. You can see the notch cut in the top of the assembly. That notch is what actually goes over the charging handle and holds it in place. So make sure that notch is forward as you turn it upside down. Once you turn it upside down, it should just drop right into place. You do have to drop it flat. You can't drop it on an angle, but like I just did, make sure that you have it flat. Drop it flat. It goes down in the assembly, and once it goes down in the assembly, the bolt and the carrier handle will go back forward as one piece. Push it all the way down, it comes back forward as one piece. Okay? Now it moves back forward just as if it was functioning. The reason it stopped right there is because it was trying to come back out. So push it back down, it goes back forward. Okay? That's it for the assembly on the housing. So you've got your housing, you've got your trigger group. Now you just need to put the two pieces back together. Take your housing, make sure that your ejector doesn't try to fly out of the way. Place it onto your receiver. At this point, take your two retainer pins for your trigger group, push them back through the trigger group and the housing. Make sure they're all the way forward. If they're sticking out just a little bit, you may have to come back with a hammer and just lightly tap them into place. Nothing too rigorous. The last piece that you have to put into your assembly is going to be your bolt pin. Just simply place that to the rearward portion. You may have to make sure that the hammer is cocked in order to do this. It goes right into place. Now to take it out, we had to make sure that the safety was in the dead center middle, that way it didn't damage the stock. To put it back in the stock, you don't have to worry about that because it's tapered going back in. All you have to do is take your stock, place the back portion of the receiver in first, and then lay the entire unit over into the stock. And it should sit down all the way just like that. Last thing, make sure that you get your stock screw lined up. Use your Allen key or flathead or whatever screw you have. Screw it back in, and I'm not going to overly bear down this. You do want it nice and snug, but you don't want to bear on it to the point that you're going to crack the stock. So nice and snug. You can do it with a short handle Allen wrench. And as you can see, I'm not going to bear down on it real hard. I'm just going to give it a nice little snugging up there. And ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much it for the assembly and the disassembly of the 1022. If you would like more information on how to do this, beyond what this video shows you, please give us a call. Check our website out. Phone number is 949-9884. Website is clarkcustomguns.com. Check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. Get you some good parts to put in there. Get rid of this factory stuff. I mean, Ruger does great stuff from the factory, but hey, you want the best, right? You want the best? Give us a call. We'll make it happen for you. This is Logan Clark of Clark Custom Guns. Good luck and good shooting, everybody.